Shabbat Shalom. In May of 1916, exactly 100 years ago this week, Theodore Roosevelt delivered a famous speech on the subject of what it is to be an American. I stand, he wrote, for straight Americanism, unconditioned and unqualified, and I stand against every form of hyphenated Americanism. I do not speak of the hyphen when it's employed as a matter of mere convenience. I condemn its use whenever it represents an effort to form political parties along racial lines or to bring pressure to bear on parties and politicians, not for American purposes, but in the interest of some group of voters or a certain national origin, or of the country from which they or their fathers came. The speech is a powerful one, entitled America for Americans, and is best understood in the context of the run-up of America's entry into World War I. It was the wake of the sinking of the Lusitania, with the death of 128 American citizens, causing a storm of protest in the States. As public opinion shifted back and forth on whether or not to enter the war, Roosevelt decried what he dubbed the moral treason of anyone acting or speaking as a German American, or an Irish American, or an English American, or any other hyphenated identity. Our loyalties and duties are first and foremost one and only as Americans. Notwithstanding the charged context in which the speech was given, the roots of Roosevelt's speech against the hyphen date back to a handful of years prior, a play written by Israel Zangwill called The Melting Pot. The play, a loose adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, tells of the love affair of two Russian immigrants and offers a grand vision of America as God's crucible, where all of the diversity of Eastern European immigrants is melted away, thus the name, The Melting Pot. Roosevelt was present at the play's opening on October 5th, 1909, and leaned over in his box shouting, "That's a great play, Mr. Zangwill, that's a great play." In fact, a few years later, Zangwill received a letter in which a former president shared, "That particular play I shall always count among the very strong and real influences upon my thought and my life." From that point onward, time and again, Roosevelt would give expression to an anti-hyphen melting pot vision of American life. No matter your origins, ethnicity, or religious background, you are American, first and foremost and only. In his words, our children's children will intermarry, one with another, your children's children, friends, and mine. Not everyone we know was taken by Zangwill and Roosevelt's vision. Despite its seemingly inclusive message, an underbelly did exist, in that tucked away in its allure of acceptance, there was also much that was being lost. Rabbi Judah Magnus of Manhattan's Temple Emmanuel sharply rejected the vision, preaching, "If all men will give up the particular traditions of their own history, then Americanization means just what Mr. Zangwill has the courage to say it means, de-Judaization. Ours is a polyglot nation, and to ask American Jews to drop their hyphenated identities was, in Magnus's words, preaching suicide to us." A counter-narrative of America's promise would soon emerge, perhaps best articulated by the prophet of cultural pluralism, Horace Kallen. It was Kallen who, by way of Magnus, offered a musical metaphor for American life, an orchestral symphony in which every type of instrument has its specific timbre and tonality. Men, he wrote, may change their clothes, their politics, their wives, their religions, their philosophies. To a greater or lesser extent, they cannot change, though, their grandfathers. For Kallen, and for those who would follow, it's the very hyphenated nature of American identity, Polish American, Jewish American, Irish American, that is the promise of this country. We must embrace the otherness of others, all the while retaining our own particularity. That is the thread that binds the sacred narrative of our country together, the cacophonous symphony of American life. As long as Jews have existed, we've wrestled with what it means to be both of and other than the majority culture, how we straddle the multiple pedigrees of our identities. That struggle is introduced in this week's Torah reading, a dispute between an Israelite and a half-Israelite, one of Jewish and Egyptian parentage, and has continued ever since. Here in this country, we've traveled far since the arrival of huddled masses 100 years ago. The Zangwill-Callan melting pot orchestra debate is but one of many markers of this ongoing tension. Oftentimes, popular culture tells the story best. Just think of the Superman comic, invented by two children of Jewish immigrants in 1938, a superhero who had to hide his true identity in America. How is that not a statement about being a hyphenated American? Post-World War II, the sociologist Will Herberg modified Callan's thesis, stating, "One can be expected to change many things as he becomes American. Nationality, language, a culture. One thing, however, he is not expected to change is his religion." In the decades that follow, one can track the degree to which Herberg's thesis is true or isn't. On the one hand, a more assertive Jewish identity emerged, parallel to other such identity movements in the 60s. Think of Leo Rosten's 1960s book, The Joy of Yiddish. Or, alternatively, Jews were publicly comfortable wrestling with their identities, as evidenced by Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint, or Woody Allen's Annie Hall, to name two of many such examples. The Eichmann trial, the Six-Day War, the fight for Soviet Jewry, each and every one of these moments reflecting a tug-of-war on the hyphen at the heart of every American Jew. All of which brings us to the question of where are we now? Is ours a time when an American Jew, or really any hyphenated American, can comfortably assert and embrace a distinctive religious identity, or has the pendulum swung back to the melting pot model of eliding all of our differences? The answer is very complicated. On the one hand, our world is more balkanized than ever. Our neighborhoods are isolated ethnically and economically, gerrymandered into red states and blue states, with information narrowcasted to suit our particular interests and proclivities. There are seen and unseen boundaries all around this country. On the other hand, identity, religious, ethnic, sexual, and otherwise, is more porous than ever. The notion of erecting boundaries of any sort is altogether displeasing to a coming generation. Ours is an age of hybrid identities, fluid identities, and malleable identities. Most of all, we live in a time when everyone must be validated in their identities, whatever they may be. The coming generation looks askance at assigned or inherited social identities. Lately, this conversation is most conspicuous on the subject of gender. Just ask a student in any of your children or grandchildren's schools. Children's genders in all their evolving configurations are, we are instructed, to be wholeheartedly embraced. This was brought home to me a few weeks ago when one of my children advised me that when I bless the congregational children at Friday night services, I shouldn't bless them distinctly as boys or as girls. After all, there are still those kids figuring it out, and they're somewhere else on the continuum. They too are deserving of God's blessing. Not once did it ever occur to me that I was being exclusive. We are living in a whole new, post-gendered, post-ethnic, post-everything world. Yes, of course, I replied to my child. The last thing I would want is to have anyone feel excluded. But here's the thing. If everyone is going to be validated in their choices, affirmed in all their identities, if the worst thing we can say to someone is that they are not okay with who they are, then have we not lost the language and ability to assert meaningful boundaries? To be inclusive and embracing speaks to all my highest values as an enlightened human being. But I'm also in the business of building Jewish identity, Jewish homes, and Jewish families. How does one maintain one's liberalism while maintaining that not all lifestyle choices are equal. I want Jews to engage Jewishly, to affiliate Jewishly, and to marry Jewishly. As an American and as a Jew, I want the ethnic kaleidoscope of this country to be maintained. Not every choice is equally okay. I do not seek or imagine some sort of John Lennon vision of a world with no religion, and Jews of all people should be very cautious of anyone preaching a sort of America for Americans ideology. I want Jews, and for that matter, all people, to opt for particularism over universalism, collectivism over individualism. Ours is not the time of Zangwill's melting pot or of Callan's symphony. It's a whole new era, and we're still figuring it out. In our post-ethnic world of unending validation, we need to retrieve a language of difference, to wear our hyphenated identities proudly, in full confidence that in doing so, we're not rejecting our American ideals, but we're actually actualizing them. This is a promise not just of being an American Jew, this is a promise of what it means to be an American. Tonight, at the conclusion of the Sabbath and at the conclusion of every Shabbat, I'll recite the Havdalah prayer with my family. Havdalah means separation. It's a blessing that marks the distinction between the Sabbath and the rest of the week, the difference between the sacred and profane, night and day, the seventh day from the other six, and the difference between the Jewish people and the rest of the world. It's a beautiful and beautifully countercultural blessing that we must learn to say. For the blessing to become a reality, for us to have a Jewish people 100 years from now, more than saying it, we must live it. Ours must be a generation ready to live vibrant, committed, and engaged lives as Jews. We must find a language of tribalism without triumphalism, affiliation without parochialism, peoplehood without ethnocentrism. In other words, we need to find a language and lifestyle of Havdalah, of Jewish difference and distinction appropriate for our age. It's not easy. In fact, it's a very narrow path to walk, but it's upon that oh so narrow hyphen of our identities by which we will find our way towards actualizing the symphony of American life. Shabbat Shalom.